Scarlett Johansson is suing Disney over their decision to simultaneously release Black Widow, the latest Marvel film, on Disney Plus and in theaters. She is claiming that the release on Disney Plus impacted the box office sales at theaters, and her compensation was tied to those box office sales, thus resulting in a breach of contract by Disney, who had promised her an exclusive theatrical release. Let's get into looking at what's going on in this lawsuit and hit these issues. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer. I'm also a legal and political commentator on YouTube and on Odyssey. Wherever you're watching, hit like, subscribe, share, turn on your notifications. Make sure you're not missing any videos. All right, jumping right into this. Scarlett Johansson sues Disney for breach of contract over Black Widow release. This article is from Variety. I'll link it in the description below if you want to check it out yourself, but we're going to hit the main points and use that as a launch pad to talk about exactly what's going on in this case and what each side's sort of approach to the issues is going to be. Disney's decision to release Black Widow on Disney Plus at the same time it hit theaters has sparked a legal battle with Scarlett Johansson, the actress tasked with playing the Marvel superhero. All right, if you're not aware, Black Widow is the character that Scarlett Johansson has been playing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe throughout all of the Marvel movies over the past, decade or something like that? It's been going on quite a while. She is an A-list celebrity. Now, this movie takes place in the middle of the MCU timeline because, spoiler alert, things don't go out so well for Black Widow in one of the movies, but that's a separate story. So this happens in the middle, but this movie is being released long after that story is done being told. So there are questions about the performance of this movie in general. However, basically every Marvel movie has a bottom line benchmark of making about $400 million with the expectation of hitting $700 to $1 billion at the box office globally. These numbers have been pretty consistent with Marvel movies. Right now, Black Widow is sitting at 319 million global ticket sales and doesn't really look to move too far past that. Now, a big part of this was the pandemic. The pandemic of 2020 absolutely wrecked the theater industry, with theaters being shut down. We had films being delayed indefinitely, and some studios came up with this great idea to simultaneously release or exclusively release on a streaming service. If they were releasing in theaters, they also got released on streaming services, and in some case, there was no theatrical release at all. They just went directly to the streaming services themselves, and the companies in these cases were attempting to add value to their overall brand by having exclusive access to some of these movies. Studios like Disney, also studios like Amazon have done this, and others. So, with that, however, there would be a notable impact on box office sales. However, with the coronavirus pandemic, it makes things not as clear. Where this comes in to be a problem with Scarlett Johansson is that her compensation, which was negotiated prior to the pandemic being an actual thing and prior to the ravages it would wreak on the industry, her compensation was tied to box office performance numbers with an alleged promise from Disney that this would be released exclusively in theaters. They were raising concerns about Disney's streaming service and statements that Disney was making about having simultaneous releases back in 2019 before the coronavirus pandemic would really hit and change the scope of how America operates for the foreseeable future. They were raising these concerns, and Disney was apparently responding, providing assurances that this exact thing would not happen. Now, the trick is, what does this mean for Scarlett Johansson? Well, her legal team is claiming that the damage amount in this could be as much as $50 million. And we'll talk about why in a minute, but let's get a little bit more of the article. In a lawsuit filed Thursday in Los Angeles Superior Court, attorneys for Johansson alleged the star's contract was breached when the studio opted not to debut the film exclusively in theaters, a move they claimed depressed ticket sales for the Avengers spinoff. Much of Johansson's compensation was tied to box office performance of Black Widow. If it hit certain benchmarks, bonuses would kick in. So it seems like her compensation wasn't tied directly to the ticket sales as like a flat percentage, although that could be in there as well. But rather, if it hits certain box office benchmarks, you can imagine maybe every 50, 100, or 250 million, something like that, that certain bonus compensation would kick in. And this is a recognition of the A-list actress playing the role that she's been playing this entire time, being the draw, bringing people into the theaters. This is a recognition of the star power of the lead character in the movie. Now, is that necessarily why everybody's going to see Black Widow? No, but if you had someone else trying to play Black Widow after Scarlett Johansson was playing it for such a long time, you might run into a problem. You might get fan backlash. It could reduce numbers. Having her recognized as an asset to the performance of this movie is tied to those compensation benchmarks. But if she put out a bad performance, if she did something on social media to make people not want to see it or whatever, that would also potentially suppress ticket sales, and therefore her compensation is tied to these benchmark numbers. That's kind of the idea behind it. Quote, Disney intentionally induced Marvel's breach of the agreement without justification in order to prevent Miss Johansson from realizing the full benefit of her bargain with Marvel, the suit reads. Okay, so this is kind of a weird thing. Marvel is a subsidiary of Disney, and so then it's kind of a separate company, but they're saying that Scarlett Johansson had her agreement with Marvel as the main production house for this, and Disney as the sort of umbrella corporation behind it. Now, they're saying that Disney induced Marvel to make this decision. They told Marvel that this is what they were going to do. Now, Disney has ostensible control being the owner of Marvel. But that's how this is going about. Disney announced in March that Black Widow, among several of its 2021 films, would premiere simultaneously on the studio's subscription-based streaming service for a premium $30 price and on the big screen as the movie theater industry rebounded from COVID-19. On July 9th, Black Widow set to pandemic-era box office record with its $80 million in North America and earned an additional $78 million overseas and $60 million on Disney+. Ticket sales steeply declined in subsequent weeks and currently stand at $319 million globally, putting Black Widow on track to become one of the lowest-grossing Marvel movies of all time. So this is the problem with what's going on. Shortly after its debut, the National Association of Theater Owners, the industry's main trade organization, asserted the simultaneous release of Black Widow in theaters and on streaming cost Disney more money in revenue per viewer over the life of the film. However, the suit notes that Disney's stock rose after the company disclosed the rental figures. And here's where we've got kind of a critical element of this case. Quote, Disney chose to placate Wall Street investors and pad its bottom line rather than allow its subsidiary Marvel to comply with the agreement, the suit reads. To no one's surprise, Disney's breach of the agreement successfully pulled millions of fans away from the theaters and towards its Disney Plus streaming services. So here's where you have a nice juicy tidbit in this contract dispute. Not only did Disney harm Scarlett Johansson by doing this simultaneous release, in doing the simultaneous release, the harm that they caused to her actually benefited Disney. They showed the efficacy and usefulness of their streaming service as a profit generator and revenue generator for the company. They showed that the simultaneous releases on Disney Plus benefit Disney Plus, and thus their stock price went up. That is the claim here. Now, there's a lot of nuance going on in this, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is the kind of thing you want. You also have the National Association of Theater Owners talking specifically about this, providing some weight to the idea that ticket sales are actually harmed by these Disney Plus things. Again, all around, this isn't that big of an issue in general. If you're just transferring the vehicle for delivering revenue based on a film from a theater box office to a streaming service, you're not ultimately doing anything that's going to damage an actor or actress's contract normally. However, when you negotiate for an exclusive release and bonuses based on the ticket sales from theaters, not based on ticket numbers from streaming services, not based on that type of revenue, but rather the other box office revenue that was kind of the traditional means of distributing these high investment films, we'll call them, such as the Marvel movies, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. If you're tying your compensation to those numbers, and then a company subsequently comes in and subverts those numbers for its own benefit and to your detriment, now we've got a breach of contract claim. So what's the complicating factors in this? Well, the obvious one is coronavirus. So while Black Widow has been the best performing post-pandemic movie release at 80 million in its opening weekend, it's a little bit anemic compared to other box office releases by Marvel pre-pandemic. So you've got some questions here. Did the pandemic do this? Did Disney Plus do this? Did Scarlett Johansson do this? Did brand fatigue do this? Did the fact that this is a mid-chronology release after the story is already over, did that suppress ticket sales? We don't actually know, and Disney is likely going to make a lot of those arguments. But one of the big problems Disney has is simply not renegotiating the terms of Scarlett Johansson's bonus structure when it chose to make this decision. And this is something that has happened in the industry multiple times and in other films. For example, in Trolls 2, which was released simultaneously but not intended to be released simultaneously, they simply renegotiated the bonus structure to compensate the actors for the streaming releases rather than the theatrical releases. This could have been avoided, but according to Scarlett Johansson and her legal team, Disney refused to enter into those negotiations, and instead, the only communications they provided were assurances that a theatrical release would occur rather than a simultaneous release. And so, if that remains true, Scarlett Johansson stands with a pretty interesting claim for a significant amount of money. And the interesting thing about this is they may want to work with Scarlett Johansson in the future, and so that might induce them to the negotiating table to go ahead and provide her a reasonable bonus structure that other similarly situated A-list actors and actresses might get had the negotiations between Disney and Scarlett Johansson taken place prior to following, I guess, their decision to move to a simultaneous release over the streaming service. Now, ultimately, if they come to the negotiating table, Scarlett Johansson is alleging outright upwards of $50 million in lost compensation due to the change in the bonus structure. But Disney has a lot of ammo on the table as well, citing the lackluster performance of the film overall, not just at the box office. And they can blame coronavirus and say they're not liable for the overall reductions and them's just the ropes. Sorry that timing worked out bad for you. We tried to maximize the profit on the release and we did our due diligence. So that allows both sides to come in and meet somewhere in the middle and hopefully for them reach an amicable decision that will allow them to continue doing business in the future, but satisfy and recognize that Disney's decision likely did cause some level of damage to Scarlett Johansson, even if it probably wasn't ultimately $50 million. All right, there you go, guys. I hope I've given you a nice 30,000-foot overview of this lawsuit, of the issues at play, of the complicating factors for both sides. We'll watch it as it goes. Don't know how public this is going to be or if this thing is going to go to any sort of trial. I have a high suspicion that this is to strong-arm Disney into some post-release negotiations to provide some compensation and recognition for the potential damage they did to Scarlett Johansson's overall income, and probably just induce them to continue doing business and to secure some sort of recognition of what they did. That's my thoughts on it. What do you guys think? Drop a comment down below. And hey, if you know people who are talking about this issue, it really helps if you share these videos out on social media and stuff like that. It means the world to creators like me. Thanks a bunch. Hope you have a nice day. We'll talk soon. Peace. Peace.